You are listening to the serialized audiobook podcast for Blood of the Stars, an epic fantasy novel written by Karyne Norton, read by Paeter Frandsen and Karyne Norton. If you can't wait to listen to the whole audiobook, or if you want a signed physical copy, go to karynnorton.com/shop to get the lowest cost by buying direct. You can also find the audiobook on Audible, Barnes & Noble, and other standard retailers. Please enjoy the next installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton.
Chapter 16.
Is it that noticeable?
Riveron's joke fell flat as his hand brushed the tattoo on his forehead. Fresh blood smeared, making Karyne wince. How long ago had he gotten it? Riveron held out his clean hand once more, and after briefly hesitating, Karyne took it, allowing Riveron to haul him up to the platform. It felt too crowded with 3 people. And 1 bird. Gullet adjusted his grip on Riveron's shoulder, his left eye drilling into Karyne. "Riveron was just filling me in on your childhood," Aura said from where she sat in the hammock. The glow of her skin had receded, and now her skin actually looked a shade deeper than his sailor's tan. Karyne shot Riveron a questioning glance. That could mean a lot of things, but no matter what it meant, Karyne didn't want any of his personal matters discussed with a stranger. Riveron shrugged.
"I haven't been able to talk to anyone besides Gullet for a few days."
The hawk squawked his agreement. "Why are you even here?" Riveron couldn't hold his gaze.
"I didn't know where else to go."
Karyne's focus strayed to the mark again. This was the trouble Enla had been referring to. Whatever Riveron had done to earn the mark had been public enough that there was no going back. Tampering or removing the mark with magic would escalate his penalty to death. And yet, Enla had said to trust him. Karyne was tempted to search the other man's memories, but he was too afraid of what else he might see. "You've had it for a few days? It shouldn't be bleeding anymore. Is it infected?"
"It was."
Riveron glanced at the woman.
"Aura lanced and cleaned it, so the wound is a bit fresh again, but at least it's not likely to kill me."
She smiled and patted his arm. For a moment, Karyne had a strange pang of jealousy. He had no attraction to Aura, but something in her expression spoke of wisdom and experience, a maternal quality. It was more like he was fighting a sibling for the attention of a parent. That he was used to. "We should get going." Karyne turned his back on Riveron. "The boat isn't far from here." He rummaged through the books on his desk until he found The Sins of the Stars and tucked it in his coat pocket. Aura raised her eyebrows. "You don't want to know why your friend has been marked a criminal?" Karyne winced. "Our friendship ended long ago. I have a good guess as to the reason for his mark." Riveron scoffed but held his tongue. "It's never wise to settle for an assumption." Aura gracefully sank back into the netting as if they had all afternoon to rehash the history leading up to the inevitable result of Riveron's mark. "Maybe he can tell me about it after you and I get back. It's important that we get out of these waters before the sun's sleep. There are too many places to run aground." Aura studied him for long enough that he fought the urge to squirm. How was it that this woman's silence commanded authority when it was his ship that would take her to Bamboo Island? He was doing her a favor. "How about he tells us both on the boat?" she suggested. "It's an 8-day voyage. There should be plenty of time." Both men eyed each other warily for a long breath. Karyne spoke first. "I can't bring a traitor aboard my boat." Aura snorted. "I'm not sure it's always clear-cut who betrayed whom. Riveron only has his mark because he's been forced to partake in black market trade. And now he can't even do that, which leaves him no way to support his wife and child. The surge of pity that flowed through Karyne ended at the mention of Riveren's family. Perhaps if he hadn't broken his bond with Enla, he wouldn't have needed to deal in the black market. Riveren needs a job, and you can provide him one as crew aboard your boat. Karyne's mouth swung open to protest, but Aura went on. It's the only way I'll come with you. If you won't provide him means to support his family, I'll need to hire him to escort me to Bamboo Island instead of you. She eased out of the hammock, standing tall while brushing off her fading cloak, as if allowing Karyne time to recover his pride. He clenched his jaw. The idea of agreeing to her demands burned, even though Larkos had lost 2 crewmen because of the rushed departure. What would the others think about Riveren? Those who didn't know him would be horrified at the idea of a marked traitor coming aboard. Sailors were superstitious enough that they'd see it as all sorts of bad luck. And those who knew Riveren would be sure to spread their opinions over Karyne's supposed acceptance of the man who had betrayed their family. And yet Enla had warned him to trust the traitor. I could cover it. Riveren's gaze ended somewhere around Karyne's elbow. There was a flicker of hope on his face, surprising Karyne. Riveren wanted to come. No, Aura said. That's the reason you developed the infection. It needs to heal in the open air. Karyne swore, running a hand through his hair. He didn't have time for this. Fine, but keep in mind that sailors found committing acts of treason on the high seas are judged by the captain and crew. You won't be given the mercy of waiting to disembark for a trial on land, especially not with that on your forehead. He gestured at the ugly brand. It was possible the men would set Riveren up for failure, wanting him to be keel-hauled. 8 days was plenty of time for them to lay any kind of blame at Riveren's feet. I'll take the risk. Riveren's agreement came quickly, his mouth very near to a smile. Even Aura's lips tilted up in something resembling satisfaction. The whole walk to the shore, which was slow thanks to Aura still being weak, Karyne couldn't help feeling tricked. Sure enough, the 2 men who rowed them back to the ship glared daggers at Riveren and Gullet while sneaking the occasional peek at Aura. Karyne boarded Starspeed first, reaching out a hand to help both Riveren and Aura up the ladder. Gullet took to the skies, aiming back toward land as if showing his irritation at their plans to be at sea. When the rest of the crew saw Riveren's forehead, the unsurprising mix of fear and dark hatred left Karyne defeated. No one dared question their captain, but whatever clout Karyne had earned with the men had just gone down several notches. Who is she? Lenda's question brought everyone's gaze to Aura as she swung her legs over the edge of the ship. Expressions shifted, backs straightened. A few men used their fingers to comb back their hair. The older men's eyes shined with interest, but the fresh recruits' faces held longing and homesickness, which Karyne didn't usually see until they'd been at sea for weeks. Aura and Riveren will join our voyage. Riveren will take over Swab so Breve can focus more on cooking. Maybe actually make a decent meal while we're out here. A few men laughed or grunted, some elbowing the young man whose pimply face turned pink. Aura will bunk with Lenda and her maid. She's our tracker, and her duties begin once we reach Bamboo Island. Karyne bristled as the elbowing started up again. She's here as a guest of the family of Eleness when she's not in my employ. Aura strode to Lenda, either purposely ignoring or unaware of the crew's leers. She gripped the younger woman's hands, whispering something that relaxed Lenda's clenched jaw into a hesitant smile. The 2 headed toward the stern, bending to enter the captain's cabin and shut the door behind them. The men's distraction disappeared with the women, and their hateful eyes trained back on Riveren. Weigh anchor and man the sails, Karyne passed in front of Riveren, drawing his crew's attention away from the traitor's mark. The Sun Sleep will be here soon, and Starspeed doesn't need to run aground because of childish grudges and superstitions. He grabbed the mop from Breve's hands, passing it over to Riverin without ceremony. The men broke into action, including Riverin, who shot Garin a look, his eyes more grateful than his stiff salute. Garin turned away without acknowledging it, determined not to let Riverin's circumstances garner any more pity. He joined Larkos at the helm, arms folded, gaze across the water. High laughter drifted from the captain's quarters below him, making him wonder how Aura had won Lenda over so fast. Probably the same way she'd had Riverin spilling secrets about their childhood. In the night, taking her to Bamboo Island had seemed right, like a spot of good fortune. Now, her presence felt too large, like she'd taken over his entire mission and made it her own. He'd have to be cautious. He'd wondered if she was a noetic when she knew his name. Maybe she'd tuned into his thoughts when he'd tried tuning into hers. Then he'd thought she might be somatic, since she'd cleaned out Riverin's infection. She could have used supplies from town, but few people knew such skills without being somatic progenies. Perhaps she had a rare secondary spoke, and she was both. But what spokes, or even rim magic, would allow her body to return to life the way it had the night he'd found her?
You never fail to surprise me.
Larkos grinned lazily, even as his focus remained on the water, his hands guiding the wheel with a precision Garin couldn't help admiring. Who wants to be predictable? Larkos laughed.
I think there are plenty of people who want you to be predictable.
That wasn't my question.
True.
They inched out from the wetlands until the wind caught the sails, and then they picked up speed. The wind whipped through Garin's hair, calming him as he let the tension of the day ease out from his limbs.
For what it's worth, I think it's noble of you to give Riverin a second chance.
Garin frowned. Your opinion's never been worth much. Larkos laughed again, ignoring the jab for the lie that it was. Enla never understood why Garin trusted Larkos, with his gruff presence and thinly veiled hatred of the crown. She'd also never sailed through a hurricane or along the Western Horn with him. After years together at sea, there was no one else Garin trusted so completely. It wasn't my idea to let him come. Garin turned, studying the men as they worked. Breve ducked into the galley to prepare what was likely to be an awful dinner, and the rest all manned their stations without complaint. Riverin kept to himself, swabbing the deck until it sparkled. Then he picked up where Thalahan, Garin's second mate, had left off, strengthening a spare sail that had loose threads. Eric watched Riverin more than he helped, but if his work ethic from the stables held, he'd be climbing the rigging tomorrow.
Is she really a tracker?
Larkos asked. Garin thought about the label he'd given Aura, the way she'd known immediately where they should go. Of sorts. It didn't seem advantageous to explain how little he knew about Aura or her motives, or her magic. She could still be an enemy, and he needed to remember that. But he didn't necessarily want others suspicious of her. Not yet.
The missus thanks you for her extended vacation from my presence.
Larkos's change of subject dripped with sarcasm. Garin grinned. I suppose she'll tell me all the ways I've made her life miserable when we return. As a young swab, Garin had been taken under Larkos's wing, and the old man's wife and bondmate, Kalia, had treated Garin as one of her own. Being so easily accepted by near strangers had highlighted the dysfunction of Garin's own parents' favoritism, and the strength of Larkos and Kalia's bond had been the reason Garin had first doubted the success of his own. Their bond came after a foundation of love, and Garin's, well, his could never be anything more than a farce. Not when they'd been assigned to each other since birth.
Of course she will. We'll both get an earful, along with a bowl of stew and some of those berry tarts we love.
Larkos rolled up his sleeves, drawing Garin's attention to a fresh tattoo. What's the story behind that? Larkos grinned.
Glad you asked.
Garin grimaced, bracing for a lecture.
It's just the wheel of magic.
Larkos held out his arm, displaying the basic hub with 6 spokes. The constructive and destructive somatic spokes were on opposite sides of the hub, their focus on adjusting the body evident by the symbol of a healing hand on the constructive side and skeletal fingers on the destructive side. The opposing pneumatic spokes were represented by black and white hearts, a symbol for sifting through souls that Karyne never understood until he saw his sister weigh the intentions and desires that would play out in a person's future. It broke her heart every time to see all the ways people could hurt each other or love each other, even if it never came to pass. The noetic spokes showed an eye, closed in concentration on the destructive side and wide open on the constructive side, which still didn't make sense to Karyne. Tuning into thoughts, memories, and emotions wasn't only something that he saw, he experienced it with all of his senses. Too many times, his progeny mentors had had to pull him from the memories, which had swallowed him whole and threatened to trap him. It was the standard wheel of magic, but a tattoo was never just anything if Larkos made it permanent on his body. Karyne looked closer. Usually, the ends of the spokes connected to form a perfect circle, the rim of the wheel holding the elemental magic few ever obtained, but the rim on Larkos's tattoo was faded, like it was old or needed a second layer. It seems unfinished. Karyne bent over to study it further, but that was the only difference. Larkos grinned.
So it is. Just like our world is incomplete without the stars.
I didn't take you to be a very religious man. Karyne couldn't keep the wry tone from his voice as he backed away and leaned against the bulkhead. He doubted the other man knew where to find the nearest sun-gazer. If anything, Larkos worshipped the ground Kalia walked on more than he did any deity. Larkos feigned offense.
I may not be devout, but I still believe. Besides, this is less about faith in a discriminatory sun and more about the fate of our world.
He gestured at the ink on his skin.
The longer the stars stay away, the more creation's balance breaks down. If you run a wheel without the rim, your spokes will bend and break. The stars are what once held our world together.
They're still involved, Karyne argued. The stars might not commune with priests in the sun-gazer anymore, but how else do you explain the honor of starlocks? Even though we're chosen by the sun, it requires a lock of hair from a star. He gestured to the teardrop hanging from his neck, even though Larkos couldn't see where it rested beneath Karyne's shirt. The shape of a starlock either represented the events of a person's awakening or some other event, past or future, that would be even more significant. Until Karyne knew what his meant, he kept it out of sight of prying eyes.
Have you compared records of starlocks?
Larkos raised his eyebrows.
Of course you haven't. In the last 100 years, the number of people being gifted with starlocks has gone down by almost half. In another 100 years, will anyone be getting them?
Half? That couldn't be right.
None of your crew has them. When's the last time you saw a commoner in the market with one? The progenies are all swept off to your schools where they become part of the nobility, which is why you still think there isn't a problem.
Larkos's jaw tightened, and his hands turned white where he gripped the wheel. Karyne wasn't sure how this conversation had suddenly become political again. He supposed it made more sense for Larkos's tattoo to be a political statement than a religious one. For all Karyne knew, this symbol could now be the mark of a recreant, their slogan changing from "Bring down the LNS" to "Save the Wheel of Magic." But the royal family had no power over the Wheel of Magic. So you think we need to call on the stars to commune with us again? Is that even possible after they put up the barriers? His recent read of The Sins of the Stars had recounted the event in detail. Whether the barriers had been put in place by Sheen and her fellow stars, like the text claimed, or by the sun in its divine justice, The barriers had also cut off the people's access to the stars. According to this book, the stars blamed themselves for the state of the world. The varying cultures were a result of the stars' interference as they not only communed with humans in sun gazers, but also started families with them, creating half-lights with star blood. The stars had attempted to right their wrong by pulling out from the lands and leaving the people to their own devices, which were just as bad as before. Larkos shrugged.
I have no clue if we can commune with the stars again. Like I said, I'm not that devout. I'm more about preparing for the inevitable breakdown of the wheel, the need to function as a society that will eventually lose magic.
Garen's hands tightened on the bulkhead. He'd grown so used to his magic, even dependent on it, that he forgot some people had no experience with it. A world without magic would still go on, but it would feel bleak. Lenda and Aura chose that moment to exit their quarters and take a turn around the deck, followed by Lenda's maid. Lenda's face was too pale, her grip on Aura's arm too tight. By the sun's sleep, she'd likely be trapped in her quarters, too sick to even come out for fresh air. In some ways, it was a relief for the women to have each other. Garen wouldn't have to entertain either of them, which would have been frustrating for vastly different reasons. The entire crew's stances shifted, their hands slowing in their work as their gazes lingered over the women.
You know, it's bad luck to have a woman on board,
Larkos grunted. Maybe having 3 cancels it out? Larkos shook his head, but there was a tilt to his lips.
What do you expect to find when we reach Bamboo Island?
Garen tensed, then pulled out his dagger, running his thumb over the daisy engraved in its pommel. Sometimes the answer felt simple. He wanted to find Daisy. Other times it felt much bigger, like finding her and solving the mystery of his childhood would open up 100 doors to his future. He wondered if that was what it was like for Enla when she sifted through souls, doors waiting to be opened. He'd told Larkos about the light, how he'd wanted to investigate its source, but that was all. Aura's presence clearly clued Larkos in to the fact that there was more to the story. Except Garen still didn't really know what he expected to find. He tucked his dagger back into his belt. Hopefully, the truth.
Chapter 17. Eliana tapped her boot against the cave wall. Her frustration grew as she watched the mouth of the tunnel for any flicker of light, signaling Silmar's return. He'd chastised her for letting Arvid and Vera take her blood, then shifted plans. He took all the Vendarans except Iris to comb the island for her guardians. She supposed the more accurate term was kidnappers, or maybe even zealots, but it was hard to think of them as anything else. The recreants had left at the sun's morn, and after 3 meals, 2 fitful naps, and infinite rounds of pacing, Eliana suspected it was past the sun's sleep. "Everything will be fine," Iris said for the 100th time. She handed over hemp, instructing Eliana how to braid it into a sturdy rope while she did the same. The activity was meant to be distracting, but it only left Eliana more agitated. Cyrus was better at keeping himself busy, or maybe he just had less to be concerned about. He sharpened a sword on the whetstone before testing its weight in his hand. A low hum wound its way through the cave, momentarily rattling packs. All 3 of them paused, eyes meeting over still hands. "What was that?" Cyrus whispered. Without warning, Iris stood, grabbing daggers and heading for the cave's exit. Just before leaving, she turned. "Please stay here." Her eyes begged Eliana and Cyrus with an intensity that didn't match her calm instructions. If no one returns before another sun's morn, take the north exit. She pointed toward the back half of the cavern, where they'd all started walking before Eliana had told them Arvid and Vera had her blood. It slopes down under the channel and will take you through to the mainland. Follow the coast south until you reach the Sound. Catch the ferry and take it to Valorian. Then go straight to the blacksmith. He'll get you to the recreant army. Don't trust anyone else. She was gone before either of them could ask a question. The sound of her boots faded, along with her candlelight bouncing off the wall. For a moment, Eliana and Cyrus stared after her, the sudden silence more foreboding than a clash of weapons would be. Eliana scratched at her back. The mark made by Arvid had scabbed over, making it itch. Could you look at my back? She swept her hair to one side and undid her top button just so she could pull the collar of her blouse down on her shoulder, angling the back of her neck toward Cyrus. His face turned red even though nothing inappropriate was exposed. Still, he leaned forward and pulled it down more, letting the cool cave air rush across the wound and provide momentary relief. Maybe Veldon could make one of those seaweed poultices for her. Eliana, what is this? Cyrus's voice was low, his words urgent. I don't know. They make the marks once a year, but I can't ever see them. Is it infected? No, They wrote words. Words? Eliana turned to face him, doing her button up once more. What does it say? Send Durican. His face grew pale, his freckles standing out. What is... She cut off suddenly, remembering. Cyrus answered the question anyway. Something that rips out people's eyes and eats them. We need to go out there, Eliana said. Cyrus gaped at her. Did you not hear Iris? Of course, but we need to know what they're up against. What could come for us? She grabbed a torch, and after a moment's hesitation, Cyrus took a sword. What? He asked when she raised her eyebrows at the weapon. He strapped on the belt and slipped in the sword, gauging its weight against his hip. Do you even know how to use that? He shrugged. It's not the same as the sabers my brother trained me with, but I know how to parry and thrust. His eyes seemed wide in the torchlight, and Eliana suspected he wouldn't actually be able to stab the sword into another person. She almost told him to leave it behind, worried the added weight would slow them down, but decided it might give him confidence. Besides, they were just going to look. They picked their way back through the cave's tunnels, hesitant to get caught, but nervous to be left too far behind. When they reached the vines concealing the cave's entrance, Eliana peeked through, blinking into the inky blackness of the night. The moon had already risen high. Do you see anything? Cyrus whispered from behind her. Just the deserted beach. Her gaze traced the path Silmar had brought them down. Wait, I think Iris is going back up into the forest. We won't be able to see anything from here. She stepped out of the cave, ignoring Cyrus's protests. She snuffed out the torch, then traced their steps back from the night before, guided by memory and the imprints of the others running before them. I think we should go back, Cyrus said for the 10th time. Eliana shushed him, wary of how their voices might carry now that they'd reached the forest line. It was harder to find the trail, so she settled for making her own, using the moon as a reference point. A rush of air mixed with thunder swept over them, rustling the leaves of every tree. The silence that followed was too complete, as if every creature, from the tops of the trees to the snakes burrowing underground, had paused in fearful recognition. "Was that the same thing we felt before?" Cyrus whispered. "I don't know." Eliana's words came out on such a shallow breath that she wasn't sure if he heard them. When she counted to 100 with nothing happening, she resumed her trek. At any moment, they would break through to the clearing they'd been in with Arvid and Vera. Hopefully, they could see something from that position. Once she knew exactly what the others faced, she would be willing to turn around and hide like Iris had asked. But she couldn't run until she knew what she was running from. Sharp pain sliced across her chest, making her trip. Panic came on the heels of the pain, but it was panic for Lukai, not herself. Was he injured? Had she sensed his pain? The unknown drove her forward, faster. The break beyond the trees came so quick that Eliana had to step back to keep herself from being visible in the clearing, stepping on Cyrus's toes in the process. He leaned over her shoulder as they scanned where the bamboo forest's edge met the field of grass. At first, it looked empty, but then lumps that were rocks became people, and nightlife sounds became hushed whispers. Silmar crouched 5 paces away, his body shaking as he bent over Jasperus, the smaller man's eyes squinting in pain. "Hold it!" Silmar hissed. Their forms flickered once more, and they were rocks again. Cyrus's sharp intake of breath near Eliana's ear made her jolt. "Jasperus is masking them with an illusion," he said. Eliana scanned the clearing, making out 4 other rocks with suspiciously human-like shapes. Then her attention caught on Arvid and Vera, a dozen paces farther than Silmar and Jasperus, their eyes trained on the skies and faces twisted in triumphant grins. The golden arrow poked out of Arvid's pocket, and Eliana caught the glimmer of glass in Vera's hands. From this distance, it was hard to tell for sure, but it seemed as if only half the vial remained. Had they used the other half to fight off the recreants? She squinted until she could make out black swirls like smoke drifting from Arvid's ears and nose. She shrank back against Cyrus. Arvid had invited in a dark spirit. They were all doomed as long as Arvid had her blood. Unless... "What if we can get them to use up all my blood?" Eliana murmured. "It would be just as good as getting it back." "No." Cyrus tugged on her arm. "You said you just wanted to look. Let's go back to the cave." Where did Iris go? Eliana counted the rocks under her breath. There wasn't enough for her mother's maidservant to be one of them. Maybe she's circling around to surprise Arvid and Vera? The illusion flickered once more, and this time Eliana recognized Lukai's form sprawled in the moss. She gasped at the red slashes on his chest. On instinct, she pressed a finger into the mark on her palm, desperate to know if their connection held. Pain seared through her, and she grabbed on to a bamboo shoot, her knees nearly giving out as she moaned. "Are you all right?" Cyrus asked. Eliana sensed Lukai's pain, shared his anguish, but the bond remained intact. He was alive. The sense of relief surprised her. He was a stranger, and while she didn't wish him dead, she also shouldn't care so much that he wasn't. As Eliana's pain faded, she gained a new sense of awareness. Arvid's eyes narrowed in her direction. "Come out, Eliana," Before I make you, Arvid called. No, Cyrus hissed, grabbing her arm to hold her back. Vera stepped closer to Lukai, who was a rock once more, and Eliana stiffened. The older woman bent down, placing her hands on the rock. The illusion dissipated, leaving Lukai hunched like a newborn baby, his face bunched in agony. He's a pretty boy, Vera said. It would be a shame to leave him less than whole. She ran the flat of her knife's blade over the smooth skin of his face. No. Cyrus tightened his grip on Eliana's arm. They already know I'm here, she argued. They'll make me come out. It's just a matter of whether it's before or after they've hurt him. That's backwards. You're falling for the same trick they used before. They'll hurt him whether or not you come out. It's a matter of whether they get you too. She bit her lip in indecision. Maybe. But maybe I can make them use up the rest of my blood. She shook off Cyrus's hand and stepped forward into the clearing. Arvid grinned, and another low rumble met their ears. The skies remained clear of clouds or lightning, but a fiery glow spread across the forest to the left. In the light, blue and purple scales briefly glittered across the sky before disappearing beyond the treetops. Perfect timing, Vera said. Our ride is here. Without warning, Eliana's legs flew out from under her, a smoky black rope dragging her by the foot across the moss. Random clusters of fresh bamboo shoots scraped her back and hip, and her vision blurred with the passing trees. Still, she caught a glimpse of Silmar's face, his scars puckering in grim determination. Vera and Arvid raced between the trees, dragging Eliana behind them, her blood and the dark spirit fueling their escape. Another rumble and another glow in front of Eliana turned Arvid and Vera to silhouettes running between the trees. Now she could see flames, slow to engulf the bamboo thanks to the perpetual wetness around them. Still, a portion of the land had been cleared to blackened ash. Other figures appeared behind her, but Eliana quickly lost the ability to identify the people chasing her, as she was tossed and turned by Arvid's and Vera's blood magic. When Eliana abruptly stopped, she let out a grunt, her entire body aching. She rolled over with a groan. Smoke filled the air and ash clung to her trousers and cloak. They were in a new clearing, unnaturally widened by fire or some kind of brutal force. The trees that weren't blackened were uprooted and cracked in half, shoved to the side as if by giant hands. On her left, Arvid and Vera argued near the center, their harsh voices making her wince, but their distraction left her free of the rope they'd used to bind her. She crawled backward away from them, her efforts likely futile. I won't give you more. Vera's voice rose and fell, only allowing Eliana to catch snippets of their fight as the older woman tucked the vial of blood in her cloak's pocket. We've already half the bottle. Mavis will... If there's more blood in the girl, you idiot! Arvid reached his hand into Vera's pocket, but she slapped it away. His eyes burned red, and the black trails leaking from his ears and nose billowed faster, like a furnace being fed more coal. Panic rose in Eliana's chest. Her hands stung, but she flipped to her knees, then shifted her crawl to a low run that took her to the tree line so she could hide. Footsteps crashed behind her until the thunderous roar returned. A massive creature flew overhead, giving Eliana a clear view of its soft, pale underside, its length from head to tail tip rivaling the height of a stargazer. Its wingspan was as wide as it was long, the transparent cerulean skin of its wings revealing the stars still at their dance in the sky above. Flame and smoke, pouring out across the northern edge of the clearing, hid its snout. Eliana couldn't stop the scream escaping her mouth, but it was muted by the roar of fire and flap of wings. The humidity that had absorbed her shifted to a blazing dryness in a matter of moments. Arvid and Vera gave one last look toward Eliana's hiding place, then turned and ran to the center of the clearing once more. "Meet Durican," a familiar voice cut through the night. She turned to find Veldin crawling up behind her with a grimace. Blood trickled from a wound at his side, which he stuffed with seaweed as he spoke. "Some say he's the last dragon." Eliana squinted through the smoke and flames to her left, but the beast was gone. Vera and Arvid huddled in smoldering ash, waiting like bait for the dragon to return and squash, eat, or burn them. Silmar and Cyrus joined Veldin and Eliana, followed by Iris and Kendallin, whose pretty face broke into a frown as she helped Eliana up. "Come here, love." Iris fussed over Eliana, smoothing her hair and cloak even as she admonished her for leaving the cave. Silmar's staff changed to a sword in his hand, its burning glow resembling coals. Except Eliana realized the staff had always been metal, its shape shifting as if it were still in the blacksmith's furnace. The dragon chose that moment to land in the newly blackened clearing, less than 100 paces away. The weight of his body touching down sent a shock through the ground that left Eliana disoriented. Smoke swirled from his nostrils, then faded as he sucked in a breath. His jaw widened, revealing sharp yellow teeth, charred flesh caught between molars. More flames erupted on Eliana's right, and fire licked deeper into the forest on both sides. Soon, there would be a wall of it cornering them in closer to the dragon. Cyrus gasped, then grabbed her hand and pulled her back out into the clearing. The others followed, taking up a defensive stance, swords raised, arrows nocked. Matching determination set all their faces in stone, but Eliana sensed a futileness beneath their actions. One by one, they loosed their arrows, but the targets were out of reach. Vera and Arvid climbed onto the dragon's back, slipping over scales and regaining their foothold as if they'd been riding dragons all their lives. The dragon shifted impatiently, claws digging at the earth like a dog pawing the ground. He turned an eye on Eliana, cocking his head as if intelligently assessing her from a distance. He didn't even glance at the small force of Vendarans, whose weapons couldn't do any damage to his thick skin. Instead, he stared Eliana down, as if daring her to come and claim what was hers. Eliana's eyes narrowed as the true situation sank in. It didn't matter that the beast could take her out with fire or claws or a single bite. Vera had her blood, and if what Veldin said was true, Eliana had no other choice but to get it back. Without a second thought, she ran, closing the distance between her and the dragon. I hope you enjoyed listening to this first installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. To get reminders for new episodes and to stay up to date with my books, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at KarynNorton.com. You'll also get the prequel short story to Blood of the Stars in ebook and audio for free. Thanks so much for listening.